Alright, so now today we are going to discuss the types of conflict, and we're going to briefly go over cause and effect. So let's begin. As we mentioned in the previous video, conflict is the main problem or issue characters must overcome. According to your plot triangle, which is right here, where is the conflict introduced? Is it at the beginning, up over here, or at the end? Alright, now, there are two categories of conflict, internal and external. So let's look at those. Internal is where a character struggles with his or her woo, goodness, thing's not one to write, isn't it? Struggles with, and for this we'll just put his, but his or her own opposing desires, beliefs, or needs. Alright. And external is obviously the opposite of that. External is where a character struggles against an outside force. So that could typically be elements of nature or another human or group of humans. Now, within these two types of categories of conflict, there are four types. We have man versus man. We have man versus nature. We have man versus society. And we have man versus self. Alright, so let's look into all four types here. Alright, man versus man. Very simple. Character struggles with another character. Typically, this involves the protagonist. Key word there. Let me make sure I'm spelling that correctly. Protagonist, which is typically the main character, a hero, versus the antagonist, which is typically the villain, the opposite character. This is the classic good guy versus bad guy situation, so very simple stuff. Now, man versus, let me go back. Hello, yeah. Man versus nature, the character struggles with the force of nature, obviously. Whether it's normal or supernatural, it doesn't matter. It just means that they're struggling with outside forces they cannot control. Usually, the character is struggling to survive. And so they're doing whatever they can to face off against these outside forces. Now, doesn't that sound like a conflict that Tom is dealing with in our current story? I think so. Alright, next up we have man versus society, which a character or group of characters fight against society they live in. The character typically fights against social traditions, or rules. So like fight for freedom or fight for a certain right. Typically, this is used to comment on positive or negative aspects of a real society, and that's very important too. We won't have to worry about that in this current story. The next one, and this is the final one for the types of conflict, and that is man versus self, where the struggle takes place in their own mind. So usually this has something to do with a choice. So choices, or it may have to do with overcoming emotions or doubts. In our current story, what kind of emotions is Tom trying to overcome, especially when he's out there on that ledge? Now, there are other types of conflicts, such as versus supernatural, versus fate, or versus technology, but typically these can be included in man versus nature, so that's not too much of a big deal. Now, within our current story, there is a main internal conflict and a main external conflict. It's going to be up to you to figure out what they are. Now, moving on, we need to briefly discuss the idea of cause and effect, which is important to most of the stories we're going to read in class. As a quick reminder from years past, because I'm sure you've heard of this before, cause is an event and an action or situation that produces a result. An effect, very simple, is that result, is the result produced. Typically, they're going to be both short-term and long-term cause and effect chains within a story. And it's going to be up to you to try and figure out which ones are which. But I'll provide you with specific examples right now. So, for example of a long term, I'm going to put up a quote here from the book. Alright. He walked to the front door closet to help her on with her coat. He kissed her, and then for an instant, holding her close, smelling the perfume she had used, he was tempted to go with her. It was not actually true that he had to work tonight, though he very much wanted to. This was his own project, unannounced as yet, in his office, and it could be postponed. Now, Tom's decision, so the cause is Tom's decision to stay at home, starts off the chain of events for the entire story. So this right here is a long-term cause. What are some of the effects of this? Well, he loses the paper, he has to go outside to pick it up, he's risking his life in order to get back into the house, all that good stuff. Now let's take a look at a short-term example. I'm going to post another quote from the story. Alright. Turning, he saw a sheet of white paper drifting to the floor in a series of arcs, and another sheet, yellow, moving toward the window, caught in the dying current flowing through the narrow opening. As he watched, the paper struck the bottom edge of the window and hung there for an instant, plastered against the glass and wood. Then, as the moving air stilled completely, the curtain swinging back from the wall to hang free again, he saw the yellow sheet drop to the window ledge and slide over out of sight. Uh-oh. So this right here is what's called a short-term cause and effect chain. So what's the cause? The paper flies out. So the cause is the paper flies out. The effect Well, you should know what the effect is. What does he have to do afterwards? Now, there's another example you can use from here for a short-term cause and effect, and that was at the beginning of the story. He opens the window, and then the effect, the yellow paper flies out. So as you can see, cause and effect is the most important aspect of any story because it leads to all the events that are going to happen within the text, such as the conflict or the rising action, the falling action, the denouement. All that stuff is from cause and effect. The character does one thing, and then there's an action that happens afterwards that he has to react to, which starts another cause and effect chain. It's going to be up to you to figure out which ones are considered long-term and which ones are considered short-term. Alright, in conclusion, there are two categories of conflict, internal and external. Internal means dealing with your own self, external dealing with outside forces. Within that, there are four types: man versus man. Very typical, easy stuff to remember. That's like the good guy versus bad guy thing. Man versus nature, when they're dealing with forces they can't control. Man versus society, when they're dealing with societal values. And man versus self, when you're trying to struggle with your own doubts or insecurities. We also now understand why cause and effect is so important to any story. It's the main backbone. That's what helps us understand anything that happens within the story. Why does the character do this? Well, if we look at the beginning, we can see why. That's cause and effect. Alright, tomorrow morning we will have a quick quiz and we'll go back and finish our story. Thank you for listening.